Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Neath Talbot County Borough Council Standards Committee of the 31st of January 2023. My name is Craig Griffiths. I'm the Council's Head of Legal and Democratic Service and Monitoring Officer, and I'll be opening this meeting today. The first item on today's agenda will be the appointment of a chairperson, and I wonder at this stage whether I could have a nomination for the role of chair, please. Councillor Thomas.
Can I nominate Louise Fleet, please?
Thank you very much, Councillor Thomas. Could I have a seconder, please?
I'd like to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Carpenter. Are there any members who are against this recommendation? If so, please could you give an indication at the present? I can see no indication, and that note then I'm pleased to confirm Louise Fleet as chair of the Neath Talbot County Borough Council Standards Committee. So over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Craig, and thank you everyone for electing me as your chairman. A very important committee, and I'm delighted and honoured to be taking the chair. So thank you very much indeed. Before we go on to the business of the committee, I'd first of all like to introduce our two new members, Duncan and Alison. Duncan was appointed and his appointment was confirmed just before Christmas. So Duncan, you are a part of this, a formal part of the committee now. Alison was only well, she won't be formally appointed until tomorrow's council, so here as an observer. But please, I'd first of all like to ask both of you just to give 1 minute resume of your background so the rest of the committee has some knowledge about your background. So Duncan, you first of all, please.
Thank you, Louise. Yeah, my name is Duncan Lewis. I'm a Professor Emeritus in Management at Plymouth University. I'm a native of the borough. I'm a Pontardawe boy, born and bred. I've lived in Carrickston for the last 22 years, doing missionary work. I remind my Carrickston neighbours. It's an honour to be invited to join the Standards Committee. I served 6 years with South Wales Police's Ethics Committee, which was a committee set up by the Home Office for all police forces in the UK. I learned a lot from that process. And I hope my background in research in HR and employment relations, I used to be a ACAS professor a number of years ago, will bring some value to the committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Duncan. Alison.
Sorry, Chair. There we are. When it's on green, it's perfect. Thank you. I'll start again in case people didn't hear me. So my name's Alison Davis. I'm a resident of Neath Talbot. As Louise said, I'm here purely to observe today, but hopefully I will be a part of the committee at the next meeting. My background is mental health nursing, and I retired a few years ago now. I'm also a magistrate based in Swansea Magistrates Court, and I've undertaken that role for the last 13 years. Yes, and when I was nursing, I obviously worked to a code of conduct, worked with clinical governance, which is aligned to standards, and hopefully those skills will be transferable here as well.
Thank you, Alison. Very warm welcome to you both and to everybody else to this meeting. For Duncan and Alison's benefit, would you mind introducing yourselves if we go round the chamber so that they know who you are? So first of all, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Sarah Thomas. I'm the elected member for Gwauncagowen and Lower Burnham. I'm also on the Community Council there.
Wayne.
Hi, I'm Councillor Wayne Carpenter, representing Neath East.
Tom Ward, independent member.
The members on video.
Me. I'm Caroline Edwards. I'm a town and community councillor in the Upper Neath Valley, and I've come onto the committee via the One Voice Wales structure. So my background is nursing as well.
Alan. Yes. Deputy Leader.
Sorry, I do apologise, Chair. But sorry that I can't be with you in person, as I need to join another meeting at a later stage. But I'm Alex Welling, the Ward Councillor for Cwmllynfell and Ystwyth Ystwyth and Deputy Leader of the Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Have we got anybody else on video? No. our guest to the committee this morning.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Rob Jones. I'm a councillor for Margam and Taibach. I'm also the Labour Group leader for the authority.
Officers, Anne-Marie.
Morning, everyone. I'm Anne-Marie O'Donnell. I manage the Internal Audit Service for Neath Talbot County Borough Council.
Morning, Madam Chair. Michael Shaw, Principal Solicitor in Litigation. I recognise a couple of faces this morning, observing this morning.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you, Madam.
Not forgetting Tammy there at the end.
Thank you, Chair. Tammy Davis, Democratic Services Officer for this committee.
Probably the most important person here.
Thank you for that, Chair. So everyone met me, Craig Griffiths, Head of Legal Democratic Services, Monitoring Officer, then Advisor to the Standards Committee.
Thank you, everyone. Moving on to the items on the agenda. First of all, can I remind people that if you've got mobile phones, please switch them off. And because we do have members coming in remotely, just a reminder, if you could switch your microphones to mute unless you're speaking. And if you need to speak, please do either raise your hand or raise your electronic hand. And I'm sure Tammy will be keeping a close eye on the computer to ensure that you're called in at the appropriate time. First of all, if we have any declarations of interest, please.
I see no hands, Chair.
Thank you very much. The next item is to appoint a vice chair.
On that note then, could I ask for a proposer for Vice Chair, please?
Am I allowed to nominate?
You can indeed.
Well, I would like to nominate Tom Ward.
Thank you very much, Chair. Could I have a seconder?
Happy to second, Chair.
That's great. Thank you very much. On that count, is there anyone who would object to that nomination? On that note, I can confirm Tom Ward is Vice Chair of the Standards Committee.
Thank you very much. Congratulations, Tom. You are.
Thank you very much.
I look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much.
Next item is the minutes of the previous meeting, which was held on the 25th of October. I assume that members of the committee have read the minutes. May I please have a proposer as to their accuracy, please? Thank you, Sarah. And a seconder, please.
Happy to second, Chair.
Fine, thank you very much. Our next item is the our group leaders' invitation. For the benefit of Duncan and Alison, this is a new responsibility of the Standards Committee, one which we think is very positive, and that is to invite the leaders of the political parties to come before the Standards Committee to explain their role within their party in maintaining and upholding the code of conduct and how they manage that within their group. So at our last meeting, we had the leader of the council, which was Councillor Steve Hunt. And today we have the pleasure of Councillor Rob Jones. And Rob, I'll hand over to you. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. Oh, sorry. I beg your pardon. Councillor Llewellyn first. Sorry, Rob. Beg your pardon. Craig will introduce the item. I do apologise.
Thank you very much, Chair. So obviously, just to highlight, as obviously the Chair indicated, this is a new duty ultimately on elected members and leaders of political groups, that they now have to have some responsibility for promoting standards ultimately within their group structures. As the Chair mentioned, the way in which the Standards Committee have chosen to discharge that duty in year one of the new administration is that we will be inviting leaders of political groups to attend the meeting. And the way in which we've agreed that this will take place is we have a number of set questions which the committee approved in a previous meeting, and effectively we'll be taking the leaders through each of those individual questions. So they'll be asked a question by a chair, they will then obviously respond, and there can be some discussion around those different aspects. So if anyone does have any questions or any issues, please do indicate as we're going through this, and hopefully we'll make this as discursive as possible. So I'll hand back to yourself now, Chair, to take members through the questions.
Thank you very much. Alan?
Good morning.
Good morning. Alan, you would have had the questions beforehand, so hopefully you've had some time to think about those. So if we could first of all start off with the first question, basically if you could introduce yourself and explain how long you've been a group leader, please.
Yes, certainly. I'm Alan Llewellyn, as introduced at the beginning of the meeting, ward councillor for one of the ward councillors for Cwmllyn Bell and Ystod y Fer, and I've been leader of the Plaid Cymru group since 2017 and deputy leader of the council since June 2022.
Thank you. Next question is, how appropriate do you believe the code of conduct is, please?
Yes, I think the code is an essential framework for the work of the elected members, that is both for actively guiding members in appropriate conduct, but also alerting councillors of ways in which the code could potentially be breached and the implications of that. It's an essential part of the practical implementation of the Nolan principles of public life. And I think it's important that it's seen as a working document that can be referred to for guidance. It can seem a bit daunting, especially for new members, but a lot of work has been done on induction and refresher training, especially by Craig, our monitoring officer, which helps make the code more understandable and usable. Specific parts of the code, for instance, on declarations of interest, are referred to in guidance or in advance of meetings, which again makes it more relevant to particular circumstances. And I think it's been helpful in recent years that the Ombudsman's office has also produced quite a lot of guidance and information, including case studies, which help us to understand the appropriateness of the code.
Thank you, Alan. Next question is, what steps do you take to promote the high standards of conduct within your political group?
Well, after the elections last year, my group had a mix of new and experienced members, and I encouraged all members to attend the induction sessions, not just the new members. For standards training, there's been both induction and refresher sessions, and I discussed attendance with the monitoring officer and democratic services, and where members had missed the original sessions, I prompted them to look at the recordings online. And just to mention also that Craig, as the monitoring officer, also briefed me on these new responsibilities that are on group leaders as of this current term. So for members being nominated to regulatory committees such as planning or licensing, I also emphasise the importance of specific training and guidance so they could undertake those particular roles. The code does come up in group discussions. For instance, if a big issue is due to be debated because there might be numerous declarations of interest or the need for guidance at how the issue can be approached. And issues of predetermination and so on are important. Then at times the discussion can be more specific to individual members, and I often recommend that a member checks their interests with relevant officers. And I sometimes ask the monitoring officer or chief executive for guidance on, for instance, if there have been any disagreements or different points of views with officers in order to advise a member. If the monitoring officer or a colleague raises a concern with me, for example, about how to avoid a potential breach, I hope that I'm always conscientious in following that up with any member that's concerned. This is also the first time that my group, the Plaid Cymru group, has been part of an administration. So there have also been additional guidance needed for those of us that are new to our roles as cabinet members or regulatory chairs and etc. And sometimes when debates do get a bit heated on an impassioned issue, I have in the past, not this term, I think, given a little prompt on some things which may have been said and perhaps shouldn't have been said in meetings, and hope that the point has been taken on board by the members concerned.
Thank you, Alan. Next question is, what do you understand to be the role of the Standards Committee?
Well, although the Standards Committee has a specific role in relation to cases referred by the Ombudsman and the Monitoring Officer, I think your wider role is to promote and maintain high standards of conduct by the Council's members. So I understand that you provide and encourage and require training to be given to members and monitor the working of the code with Neath Talbot Council, but also community councils in our area. And I think that the new arrangements for standard committees with more independent members and independent chair, I think will help to enhance that role. Looking at the agendas of the committee, I think it's also important that you receive reports from the officers and the Ombudsman on Ombudsman reports and adjudication panel judgments to see the broader picture across Wales. And it's also valuable that you are consultees, for instance, today on the Employee Code of Conduct and the whistleblowing policy, and able to bring your experience and views to bear. And I think where appropriate, also the issues arising from Standards Committee can help to inform the work of Audit and Governance and Democratic Services Committee within the authority as well.
Thank you, Alan. Next question is there any work that you feel the Standards Committee should be undertaking over the next year to help you with your role as Deputy Leader?
Well, I think actually today has been a help as I was considering the questions, which were, as you mentioned, were kind enough to provide in advance. So I was reflecting on my own responsibilities, and I think that perhaps via feedback by the monitoring officer or yourself as chair, we can pick up on emerging issues from your work that I can share with my group and help maintain awareness.
Thank you, Alan. That's a good suggestion. And how can the Standards Committee become more active in promoting the ethical conduct amongst councillors and co-opted members?
A lot of the ingredients are in place through the induction and the other training already mentioned. But I think it's also the possibility of demystifying the role and the work of the Standards Committee. The perception can be very much that it's a disciplinary body. Last week when I was comparing diaries for a meeting with a colleague, I mentioned that I was attending Standards Committee this morning, and they immediately asked, well, what have you done now? So, well, of course, the regulatory role is very important, but I think there can be more emphasis and information on the role of promoting high standards as a positive way of improving the work of the authority and of helping us as members to avoid getting into difficulties. And again, I think the increased independence of the Standards Committee can be a help there and a basis for sharing more information on the role of the committee, the good practice that comes through from Ombudsman's reports and so on.
Thank you, Alan. I think you made a very good point there that the Standards Committee is what much wider, and it is about improving things as well, and also about helping people as to how they can be improved too. So thank you for that. The next question is that the Ombudsman and the Adjudication Panel for Wales and the High Court has taken a view on politicians, and in some cases senior officers, having a thick skin, and on political banter being part of the political landscape. So what are your views, and how would you ensure, as a political group leader, to ensure that the line is not crossed?
I suppose it's a question of degree. I feel that term banter in itself is in danger of being overused, whether by politicians or footballers or TV presenters or whoever, when it can actually be quite offensive. I'm not sure what term we should use instead. But I can understand why the Ombudsman stress in their guidance that they discourage a plethora of low-level complaints, and I would hope that local resolution or simple courtesy such as an apology, a timely apology, can resolve most issues, and that is certainly something I would encourage as a group leader. Most members have a level of resilience, commitment and passion, And not many posts have a job description of a thick skin required by the High Court, which was I was reading. But we must be aware when lines are crossed and if issues become unpleasant or offensive. I mean, I know for members very often, it's comments outside of the council that can actually be more concerning. For instance, on social media, and that's a wholly different scenario again that we're very conscious of. But within the authority and within our own meetings, we must be aware when lines are crossed or potentially crossed. And I think that each ombudsman, when they're in the role, tends to evolve policy and practice. And I think it'd be interesting to see how the new ombudsman, Michelle Morris, develops her guidance on this as time goes on.
Thank you, Alan. Next question about training for councillors, and that's of course vitally important. So how do you think the Standards Committee can tackle those who do not see training as important?
I think that, as mentioned, that the monitoring officer and democratic services take a comprehensive approach right from the initial induction. And I think that, through refresher training and so on and guidance at meetings, and thankfully there are relatively few breaches reported. So that's one measure of the effectiveness perhaps of the training. In terms of members who haven't attended training and have perhaps not engaged in the processes, I think that we need to continue promoting the understanding of the roles of the Standards Committee, but also the importance of the Code of Conduct itself. It might be, Chair, it might be to the benefit of the committee if you received reports on training attendance. I'm not suggesting individual members being named, but the general pattern of attendance. I'm not sure if it's possible to record everybody that attends via the recorded sessions on the internal YouTube channels, but we could possibly request the monitoring officer on your behalf to go back to those that haven't attended and to inform the group leaders as well, so that we can fulfill our responsibilities to ensure that everybody is engaging with the process, and explain that apart from the fact that it's a requirement, it's also in their own interest and for their own protection.
Thank you, Alan. And the last question is about the resolution process, and that is capable of being used by councillors. In the event of a dispute, will you be encouraging the members of your party to use the process? And do you consider the lack of referrals to the local resolution process demonstrates that councillors are behaving within the code?
Yes, well, I would certainly encourage the use of the local resolution process if needed and if it was appropriate. I mean, I hope it wouldn't even come to that in most instances. I think that dialogue and, where appropriate, perhaps an apology if something untoward has been said or done, can resolve most issues within the authority. I think in general relationships within our council in Neath Talbot have been courteous over the years, and I was opposition leader before deputy leader, so I've seen it from different perspectives and different aspects. We can't be complacent, but we can see from various reports that there can be a more aggressive culture in some authorities or among some individual members, which goes beyond being robust and acceptable. But I think particularly bearing in mind the Ombudsman's guidance on the referral of complaints, I think that potentially the local resolution process is a very, very useful tool for resolving difficulties at hopefully an early stage.
Thank you very much, Alan. Thank you for your answers to all those questions. There's quite a few, quite a test for you. So I'm going to open it up to the rest of the committee to ask if any of the members would like to ask Alan any supplementary questions after having listened to his presentation there. Any questions from anybody? I have one, Alan.
Yeah.
I was just wondering, because you said that this is the first time that you have been and your party has been part of the administration, and I was wondering what aspect of the code do you have your members found particularly difficult to get to grips with now, that because it's quite different, isn't it, being in opposition to actually being part of the administration? So what are the issues that you found perhaps which are more common than others?
I think that the nature of decision making, of course, is different because in scrutiny, obviously, very important role, and I had it, previous occasions served as a scrutiny chair, very much an advocate of scrutiny, and indicative votes are taken at scrutiny. Whether an item is supported by scrutiny committees to go forward to cabinet, but the actual decision making, unless it's an overall issue which comes to full council, lies with the cabinet, and I think that's it's been a new experience for us, been a learning curve, particularly in these difficult times, which we perhaps hadn't predicted quite as they are. So obviously, we've had to take advice about where the roles lie in terms of decision making. Predetermination is one issue, obviously, that's very relevant to that. The balance between political views and officers' advice, and where that sits within the code and the processes and the constitution. So it is, I'm being very conscious of those issues and the fact that we haven't previously been experienced in discharging those particular responsibilities.
Thank you, Alan. There was a couple of points which I thought you made, which were really quite interesting in terms of the banter was one of them, and what is perhaps perceived to be by some as crossing over the line and others not. And I think that's something that can be quite a personal interpretation of what is being said, but nevertheless there does need to be standards, and people need to take care. And the other issue, perhaps in common or in association with that, is actually you perceive that there are more issues outside of meetings in the council chamber in terms of comments made rather than inside. And I wondered if you had any thoughts on how that situation can be better improved. And I think you mentioned social media was one aspect of it as well. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, it's obviously sort of a very live issue. I mean, say in terms of conduct within the meetings, I think the examples have been pretty rare, thankfully so far. I hope I'm not tempting fate, where lines have clearly been crossed. Some issues can be quite sort of emotive, and obviously you don't want people to lose a sense of humour or a sense of perspective around things either. It is a balance, but you need to recognise when things have gone too far or become distressing. The question of social media is a difficult one. I think that we're all grappling with. I mean, at its best, social media can be a wonderful way of sharing ideas and sharing information, and you can have some examples of some very well moderated local community bulletin boards on Facebook, and the other platforms that really says what it does on the tin. They really are social. But then there are others where comments can be quite aggressive. There is a danger of members falling foul of answering in a way that's also inappropriate. So we need to be aware of that in terms of our own conduct online and what gets put out there. And of course, it can be difficult because very often on social media we're on the receiving end of the comments, and you know, you have to strike a balance about, you know, how far do you respond, how far do you contest what's being said. On very, I think I can only think of one example where I've actually, you know, sort of blocked somebody on from social media comments because, you know, I feel that people have their view. But you know, there was an issue which you know, absolutely overstepped the mark on going beyond fair comment. But I know that it can be difficult for members, and we've tried taking a look, you know, sort of collectively at you know, the issue. We received some training on good practice from our media teams, and you know, we have said, and you know, we're not alone in this in our authority, but we have said that we you know, want to look further and see what national guidance and so on is available as well. It's not one that's got an easy resolution, you know, and you know, we sometimes members remove themselves from social media, at least for a period, you know, because they feel that things have just come too much, and you know, members aren't obliged to have a social media presence, but it's so ubiquitous that it's very difficult to communicate wider in the community without having some form of social media presence. And we're probably all a bit old-fashioned using using you know, Facebook. Everybody's moved on to TikTok and everything now, which I don't know about. Oh, I do apologise. I don't know if you've lost me. My power is going down. I'll try and reconnect.
Well, we've lost your face, Alan, but not your voice. So
oh, right, there we are. Sorry, and I will plug in the power is showing low on me, so that might be. I do apologise. I thought I'd. There we are.
Well, you were fading. You were fading. Oh, there we are. You're back.
Thanks very much. Yes, I plugged in now. So.
Thank you very much, Alan. Craig, would you like to ask any questions?
Nothing for myself. Just obviously thank you for attending. I think it was interesting you picked up the question on the comment on member training, and we have brought a return ultimately to the Standards Committee previously, Councillor Llewellyn. It's good to see that all 60 members of Neath Talbot Council have engaged in their code of conduct training during the member induction process. That was really positive to see. One thing we have picked up is one of our biggest issues obviously relates to town and community councils, and obviously elected members there on co-opted members obviously partaking in the various training opportunities, and the Standards Committee have been trying to do work to try and encourage more of a take-up in respect of that training and different opportunities, and we're looking at ways in which we can continue to explore that. But the positive news is, from a county borough perspective, we can say all 60 members have partaked in code of conduct training in the course of the last year, and we'll be doing refresher sessions then obviously as the year goes on as well.
Oh, thanks very much for that information.
I think the refresher sessions are important, aren't they? Because everybody needs a reminder from time to time, and it's quite easy to forget or for things to fade, and so that regular updates is good and keeps people's knowledge and awareness up to level. And I think we saw later on in the agenda the Ombudsman's the reports. The training was an issue there, and the importance of having that very quickly after members are appointed, and indeed then, as we've just been saying, keeping their knowledge up to date and you know, always in their conscious mind rather than at the back of their mind. Annie, thank you very much indeed. That was very comprehensive, very interesting to hear you talk, and thank you very much for your time in coming to the Standards Committee this morning.
Well, thanks very much for the invitation. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Are you going to stay for the meeting? Because I think you said you had to leave to go to another meeting.
Yes, if it's okay, I need to join a meeting on the Welsh Government's housing panel. So if you'd excuse me, I'll join in with that meeting if that's
absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you very much again. Thank you.
Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr. Thank you. Yes. Councillor Rob Jones, over to you.
How do you follow that? I'll only keep you an hour and a half, if that's okay. My name is Rob Jones. I've been a councillor for 11 years. I've been the Labour Group leader since the local elections. Prior to that, I was the leader of the council for 4 years from 2017.
Thank you, Rob. Next question is, how appropriate do you believe the code of conduct is?
It's appropriate in part. I think it could be more robust in some areas, particularly as Alan mentioned, social media causes a great deal of problems with members. It's also 2 years out of date. Nick Bennett, last ombudsman, wrote in 2021, and I know Michelle Morris is new to post, but I certainly think that there are areas that need to reflect modern trends within the political sphere. As I've mentioned, the social media is becoming more and more of a problem, and it doesn't really include hybrid meetings, which all councils have now gone to. And very often there are issues with the code of conduct that are not covered. For example, someone forgetting to switch their microphone off and then saying something derogatory. All meetings are now tape recorded, so there is no dispute in relation to what was or wasn't said, as opposed to a face-to-face meeting. So there is irrefutable evidence of potential breaches, but the code of conduct doesn't actually cover those areas. But as a document, it's good. It's a guidance based on the legislative framework that both you as a standards committee and the Ombudsman has, and then the panel, should that go forward, to keep people in public life, councillors, those that are appointed at whatever level, in check.
Thank you, Rob. Excuse me. I think you raised a very good point there about updating the code of conduct, and the hybrid meetings is something that, well, it certainly hadn't occurred to me, but I think it's a point very well made. Yes.
And very much so in that sense. Obviously, the fundamental principles, obviously, that are within the code of conduct, you could argue, obviously, are going to be equally applicable to the concept of hybrid meetings. But I think the need ultimately to start emphasising about the very different position that a hybrid meeting can ultimately bring, and the issues of recording and webcasting, etc., certainly need to be codified in some way for it. So I think it is a very valid point, absolutely, and something we can certainly take forward with the WRG and the Ombudsman in that regard.
Thank you for that, Rob. Because Councillor Jones is in the chamber, I think it's much easier to ask questions as we're going along. So please do raise your hand if you want to ask questions. A little bit more difficult on the screen, but please, if there's any questions as we're going. Sarah, would you like to ask a question?
Sorry, I'm not used to being in the chamber. It's more of an observation, really. So I know on legislation.gov.uk, the code of conduct hasn't been updated with the 2016 amendment. So the PSOW is the only place where you can really get the full text. So it'd be really good if we get that sorted as well. Thank you.
Next question. What steps do you take to promote the high standards of conduct within your political group?
I think one of the best ways as a leader you can promote standards is actually set the example yourself. I would agree with Alan in his comments about the monitoring officer. I probably speak to Craig more than I speak to any other officer in the council. But it's all about setting examples. You do have more experienced councillors that, needless to say, being around the block, they know what the score is, they know what the standards are. It's more difficult for newly elected members. The only way I can really emphasize the difficulty in trying to get people to adhere to the codes, when you become a councillor, certainly in the Labour Party, you go through a series of interviews, you go through a process of selection. You are asked the questions, is there anything that could embarrass the Labour Party or that sort of thing? But you're never told about the code of conduct and the standards that you need to adhere to. And I would probably think that goes across all political parties, no one is actually told here are the rules that you have to abide by when you want to become a councillor. Because if you ask someone when they become a councillor, they'll say they want to do good, they want to work in the community, they want to give something back to the area, and they have that bent towards that role. Many of us are retired or part-time in work. But no one mentions standards, and there could be an opportunity, and something that I've been looking at is that going forward in any form of election, whether that's general election, local elections, town community council elections, I do feel there's a need to emphasize that there is a code of conduct, that there is a code of standards that we have to adhere to. And some people may find difficulty in actually looking at that code, because it is quite an onerous document, and actually interpreting what the code actually means. And I think it may be a major step of mind change to say to people, these are the rules that you have to abide by. And therefore, if you don't think you can abide by these rules, then you shouldn't be standing for election in a public office.
Thank you, Rob. Again, a very interesting point, Craig. It's about that pre-select, even at pre-selection, rather not even pre-election, is about that understanding of what is expected of you if you are elected. And is there anything that could be taken forward in that regard?
I think there is actually, and again, just thinking of it logically there, I suppose, obviously within the political groups, it's not something that the council would have a lot of specific involvement in as to how obviously certain elements are dealt with there. But obviously when individuals decide that they wish to stand for the council, whether that be town and community councils or the county borough council, they have to contact our elections office, they get the nomination pack. Why aren't we putting a copy of the code of conduct and some of the guidance in that elections pack that they can start to actually see, well, if you are elected, these are the rules ultimately that you are going to follow, and they can see that from the word go. Obviously, they may decide then, oh my gosh, there's too many rules here as a result of this. I don't want to get anywhere near that at all. But at least there is a degree of transparency and upfrontness where people can then see that there are going to be principles they're going to have to follow from the word go. So I will certainly look at speaking with Neath, our elections manager on that. It's a very valid point. Thank you for it.
And perhaps because Rob, you made the point, and we all recognise that actually it's quite a meaty document, a lot in there. Maybe there could be just a one-page summary of the key points that so people don't have to read the whole thing, because a lot of legalistic language in it. Maybe just summarising like that, and then more detail. They've got the code then to back it up.
Indeed, and I think that's where we can take advantage of some of the guidance notes that the Ombudsman ultimately produces, because they design these documents clear English, no sort of legal jargon, etc. And it helps to give some practical examples at the same time. So it's obviously how we can dovetail both elements together.
Okay, thank you. Sarah.
So it's really interesting to do that, because you're not technically a councillor until you've signed your declaration, which is agreeing to abide by the code of conduct. So I always thought it was a bit bizarre that the first time you lay eyes on the code of conduct officially is when you sign that document, or when you're provided it ready to sign. So that is odd. But I will say that there is a particular clause in the code of conduct that is definitely not in clear English. It took me about 20 minutes to work out what that one meant. So there could be room for improvement there as well.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. Next question is about what your understanding of the role of the Standards Committee is, please.
It is, I would say, apart from the monitoring officer being the first step in relation to potential complaints or listed complaints coming forward. You are the guardians of the code of conduct for members, and you are the ones that interpret whether the code has been breached. You also have the duty where the Ombudsman feels that the matter is not to be dealt with by them, but is referred back to the council for the Standards Committee to make decisions. So you are the guardian, as far as I'm concerned, in relation to members' activities and breaches potentially of the code of conduct. So in essence, to use my parlance, you're the police of the conduct of members, town council and county council.
Thank you, Rob. And what more, which is the next question, is there any more that you think the Standards Committee could be doing to help you with your role as a group leader, or indeed your members?
Picking up on Alan's points, you can dispel the myth that you are the bad boys committee or bad girls committee. Because like Alan, when I said to someone that I was coming, my terminology, in front of the Standards Committee this morning, they said, oh God, what have you done? And that's the reputation that the Standards Committee has got. You could see the Standards Committee as a critical friend. And I think that certainly the reputation, not this committee, but based on other iterations of the Standard Committee, it has this reputation that you will come in front of the Standards Committee for either to be found guilty or not guilty of a crime. And I think that's the difficulty that you have as a member, is that you actually see it as a crime. It's not seen as a breach. Now, I know it's the same word, but it's the different interpretation and the interpretation by others that if you come in front of standards, then in fact you've done something wrong, whereas it may not be the case. You know, God forbid, I haven't done anything wrong this morning as far as I'm aware, but the interpretation by others when you tell them I'm in front of standards tomorrow morning was, what have you done wrong? So there's a bit of PR work I think needs to be done, and it may be advantageous that although the change in the legislation allows you to question the leaders of the individual political groups, a suggestion that I would make is to actually get small cross-party members to come to the Standards Committee by invitation and ask those members whether in fact they've got any questions, and see what response you get from them as to what their fears are. And I would think particularly new elected members will have more of a fear of the Standards Committee, or less because they don't know what you do.
Thank you, Rob. That's Duncan. Yeah.
An observation, really, and when police forces were encouraged by the Home Office to create ethics committees, one of the challenges was trying to get police officers, as you rightly said, Rob, to see the value in a process that could help them in their day job, rather than being seen as a backstop to hold people to account. And something that we learned from certainly my 6 years with South Wales Police was, if we encouraged police officers of all ranks and administrators to come forward with ethical dilemmas, they could be considered by the committee. And I think that could be something that maybe the council could learn from, where new members or experienced members could come forward with concerns or issues that they may feel could put the code of conduct into question, and present them almost as a dilemma. And equally, I think from the committee's perspective, if we were to create some small case study exemplars of situations where, using banter as an example from earlier, how that code could be breached, either inappropriately by accident or by more purposeful means. So I think we could work in harmony in creating those sorts of dilemmas, receiving them, but also presenting them for others to consider.
Yeah. Thank you, Duncan. Tom?
Yeah, just off as an amalgamation of sort of both ideas there, and I don't know what the view is. Do you think it would be possible for perhaps members of the committee to, I know the invitation has been put out before for members to attend local council meetings and things, if members of the Standards Committee could go along with perhaps a 20-minute presentation to members on the community council meetings and everything like that, give them a better flavour of what we're there for?
Absolutely. I mean, there's one of the things that we've spoken about previously is designing a code of conduct training exercise. We're obviously taking advantage of some of the benefits now in which we can do things remotely, or we can do things obviously using the Zoom platforms, Teams, where we can record sessions and we can issue them then to members that way. One of the scenarios then are obviously introductions from the Standards Committee to talk a little bit about what the role of Standards Committee is, what we're trying to achieve with training, and we can build it all in that way. So there's the choice then of whether we can do that in person or whether we can actually do it remotely and issue some videos to town and community councils for them to utilise, which may perhaps have more appetite for people because it's something they'll be able to watch in their own time, as opposed to maybe having to attend specific training sessions. So that is certainly a valid point we can take forward, Vice Chair.
I just think perhaps it would dispel some of the myths that Rob and others have said about them having to appear before the Standards Committee of what have you done wrong. At least if we're out there talking to people, it'll dispel that myth.
Yes.
I can further exemplify that. I served 33 years in South Wales Police as a police officer, and for 10 of those years I was on the traffic department, quite a kudos position. And they brought in armed response vehicles, which meant that you had to carry a gun. And I'd never ever wanted to be an armed officer. So I decided I would go back on the beat because they didn't increase the capacity. So you had 400 officers. So half of those went as armed response. And I said, no, I didn't want that. And the ironic part about it is because you wear the yellow reflective jackets on traffic and a white hat, I then had to go to the tailors and actually get a black anorak and the policeman's helmet. And when I went to the tailors with my uniform kit, the first question out of his mouth when he looked at that, and of course I'm standing with my white hat and my yellow jacket, and he sees black anorak and police officer's helmet, he says, "What have you done wrong?" And I think that's a rumor, a situation that needs to be dispelled, and that's the point I think that you've understood.
So, I mean, furthering on from that, really, perhaps it'd be a good idea if all committees had a bit of sort of an introduction video, not introducing the members so much, but introducing the purpose of the committee, its terms of reference and things. And that could be, front and center when people do want to go look at our recordings. I'm sure we get inundated with people watching our recordings. But I mean, it's something like I did know about the Standards Committee before I became a councillor, because I was a community councillor and I've had to speak to Craig and I had to apply for a dispensation. And I don't fear it, but I don't think it's entirely because I'm super naive. I was really pleased to be appointed to the Standards Committee because it's something I felt I knew a little bit about and I had a bit of knowledge on. But there are so many things that you need to learn when you become a councillor that, and while the training is great for us internally, for people coming in, much like not sort of laying eyes on the code of conduct until you're signing a document saying you're going to abide by it, it'd be nice if there was a little introduction video. And I will say, I think if we give videos to people to watch in their own time, there is a bit of a tendency for people not to watch them. So maybe if we could encourage people to pop it on the agenda, if it's a short sort of 15, 20-minute video, we could perhaps ask that it be included in the agenda and then the council watch it as part of one of their meetings. And that would be perhaps a way of sort of encouraging it and encouraging discourse between that council. And then we could have an opportunity for them to have feedback questions and so on.
Right.
Absolutely correct. Indeed. And I think you picked up on something there, which I was just thinking about, in that back in 2021, when new legislation came in, one of the obligations on local authorities was to produce a sort of an easy read guide to our constitution. So it was designed to take some of the legal jargon out of the process and to give a document which members of the public could look at, which sets out the decision-making structure of the council. So which committee has the responsibility for making decisions, who's on each committee, what's its purpose in that sense. And there was a discussion ultimately within the forums that I sit on that it's all well and good having these documents which try to simplify things, but are people actually going to read them in the big scheme of things? If we want to try and encourage user-friendly guides, one of the options we can look at is, do we need to do more things like videos, more like introductory sessions, what purposes of things are, and make it more dynamic ultimately so people can actually sit down and understand them as opposed to having to read a document. So I think it's a very valid point Councillor Thomas picked up on there.
Oh yes, Councillor Edwards.
Thank you. Yeah, a few things on those points, really. I just wondered how Craig kept records of town and community councillors attending the Code of Conduct sessions. Our councillors have done training through One Voice Wales. They can log on and do the training that way, which I think is quite useful. But I do think if the Standards Committee were prepared to do a video that could be used in the council meeting, because I've got 10 members on my council, they could all watch it together, and as you just said, just have discussion on that. But I just wondered how you kept count of the town and community councillors training, Craig. Thank you.
The obligation, obviously, to keep a record of any training would rest with the clerk, specifically of that town or community council. What we've done as a standards committee is issue a survey to town and community council clerks to ask if they can give an indication of what the training returns have been, who's participated, who hasn't, etc., so that we can get an information that way. We don't always get all of the information back, ultimately, and as I think we indicated in one of our previous reports that were brought to this committee, the take-up in some town and community councils is very slim. You have some who are very keen and they make sure, obviously, that all their members partake in code of conduct related training. And you've got some that, whilst they encourage it, don't actively stipulate the members have to attend it or put measures in place, obviously, to make sure that they do. So there can be a mixed bag, ultimately, within the town and community council setting, but we do what we can to try and promote it. But I think, again, that's one of the work programs we look at within this particular standards committee, is what more can we do, ultimately, to promote then as part of that.
Thank you, everyone. That was a really useful discussion and lots of very good points and action points coming out for us, Craig, there. And you're absolutely right, Rob. It is about, I think, use that very good word, a guardian. The Standards Committee is the guardian of the Standards Committee, and it's getting over 2 members that were actually here to in a safeguarding role, safeguarding their reputation of the council, and therefore it is about that supportive role. Obviously, there is that that element to it where you have to deal with things where there are breaches, but essentially it is about ensuring that things don't go wrong, and that's the primary purpose of us. And it's getting that over to members that there's actually nothing to fear, and in fact we're here to help is another key message as well. So. Yeah, thank you. That was excellent. Question E, I think we're on. If there's any work you feel that the Standards Committee could undertake in the next year, and perhaps we've touched on a few of those things that actually would help going forward. But is there anything particular with regards to your role as the leader of your party that you would welcome Standards Committee input into?
No, I think we've covered it with the previous answers and the interventions that now look to be lined up by Mr. Griffiths.
Indeed, yeah, thank you. And perhaps the next question is about how we can be more proactive in promoting the ethical conduct. I think we've touched on quite a lot of those kind of issues in the debate that we've just had. So I guess there's perhaps not anything further you would want to add to that. The next one is, do I need to read it out, Rob?
No, I've got the questions, Chair. This is probably more of a difficult area to move into. I myself, as a result of a complaint, the complainant was told that they have to have more of a thick skin, and that came from the Ombudsman. But what is the level of a thick skin? Some people are far more offended by what could be perceived as innocent comments that were not meant with malice in relation to either meetings that are said within a meeting. I think we have more of a problem in relation to complaints outside of the formal setting of council than ever we do from within council. And I, question J is council and council, so I won't go into that area at this moment in time. But the political landscape these days, if you use the wrong terminology, people will jump. You know, I said earlier, policeman. People would say police officer. It could be when you're talking about ethnic backgrounds. Some people will say black. Others will use the terminology colour, depending on their age and depending on the generation that they've been brought up in. So it is a very difficult area to say and dismiss some complaints that you've got to grow a thick skin. I think to a certain degree, and I will enlarge when I come to question J, the bigger problem that we face is outside of council, not within council. And there is no easy answer to this question. I think one of the messages that has to be got over to all levels of councillors is that the job is 24/7, 365. You cannot disassociate yourself by saying, I'm a member of the Scout Association, Girl Guides Association. So therefore, I'm not speaking as a councillor. I'm speaking as a leader in one of those organisations. I'm speaking as a PCC member for the local church. I'm speaking as someone that's involved in the charity. Ultimately, you are a councillor, and therefore you have to stand or fall in the decisions and statements that you make as a councillor, because people in the public will see you as a councillor first, and the secondary position will not take relevance in relation to anything that's said. So can you grow a thick skin? Why should you? Why should you be subject to complaints from members of the public or from, dare I say it, colleagues within this sphere? If it's unacceptable to you, it's unacceptable to you. But the Ombudsman is pushing this, well, as a politician, you have to have a thick skin. Where does it say that about any other role in society? And I disagree with the statement, not the question, the statement, you have to have a thick skin. So I don't know whether that answers the question, but that's my viewpoint in relation to being a leader. No one should be subjected to any adverse comments that you have to have a thick skin.
No, I think that's a point well made, Rob. Just because you're in public life doesn't mean to say that you don't have any feelings or that you can't be treated with respect as you would expect to be treated if you were not in that position. And role of a councillor is 24/7. You're right. At all times, you are a councillor, and it's you can't get away from that. But it doesn't mean that you're fair game for any comments. But unfortunately, people do tend to think that you are, as with lots of other roles in public life. Any questions on any supplementary? Yeah, Duncan.
Observation again, Rob, if I may, from national research I've been involved in the UK, in a workplace setting, incivility and disrespect are the most common forms of cited grounds for bullying and harassment. And unpicking those is just a nightmare. And you're absolutely right. It's this notion of having to develop a thick skin is wholly unacceptable in my view. The difficulty is knowing when a line is crossed or when a line isn't crossed, and individuals' morality and ethics varies. And in council life or the police or any other organisation, it's a cross-section of people. So I think it comes back to something we touched on earlier about maybe emphasizing through case studies, through exemplars, through simple common lists of what is deemed to be acceptable and unacceptable. And you have to spell it out to people because people through heated argument will cross a boundary and then will hold their hand up and apologize and say, sorry, I got it wrong. And that's we have to accept that. It's when it's repeated behavior it becomes a problem. So I think that there's a lot of work we can do as a standards committee to help reinforce codes of conduct and behavioral standards. And it's an endless task. It's not something you do once in a period of training that people sign off and say, I've gone through the training. There's a process of repetition and reminder in documents, in video. I've done a lot of work with Royal Mail, spent millions of pounds on bullying and harassment training. And it's an ongoing problem, and the NHS the same. So I think that this is a path that we're set on. It's part of what's going on. It's not just a British problem, by the way. This happens everywhere. It's just how we now choose to reinforce what we expect of reasonable behaviour and helping people to understand when boundaries are being crossed. And I think that's part of our job as a Standards Committee.
Can I just say, before anyone to dispel any rumours, I'm no angel. I've said things that I've apologised for. You know, I don't think there's anyone that sits in this chamber, whether they are councillors or officers, that haven't said things that they would have regretted. And I think it's the appreciation of recognising that perhaps that apology was required. You know, none of us are angels. We all say things in the heat of the moment. But you're right, there's this culture of growing a thick skin that should not be acceptable. We don't accept it in any other form of society at this moment in time, but it seems to be acceptable and documented by the Ombudsman and the High Court.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. Sarah.
So I'm not arguing, but I am going to disagree a little bit. I think that, you know, when you're in public life, you do need to have a thick skin for your own benefit as well as for everyone else's benefit, because you are subjected to comments all the time. And I think if you don't have that thick skin, then you're going to get wounded. But I also think it's not always what you say; it's how you say it. And I think that, you know, at the end of the day, words are tools, and while there are absolutely words that everyone knows we shouldn't be using, I mean, you can use perfectly acceptable words and still deeply offend someone. It's how you do it. But also, we're passionate about what we believe in and what we're trying to do. And I think that the point that the Ombudsman sort of makes is that leads to heated discussions. And it's not that you're necessarily attacking your fellow, you know, councillors or indeed officers. It's that you're passionate and you deeply believe in something, so you're taking a strong position on it. And I think that people need to bear that in mind as well. But I would agree, people should always apologise if they feel that a line has been crossed. As a nation, I think we do tend to tease and joke, though, and we enjoy a bit of a joke, and it can be very easy for that line to get a bit blurred and to cross it. But I think we also know when we've done that, and when you have done it, it's important to put it right. So I am curious, though. So I do have a question for my leader. So in the event, like as an example, then, if I was to raise a complaint about a fellow member of the group, what process would you follow? Would you necessarily bring it to the monitoring officer and standards, or would you try and sort of deal with it internally first? I'm genuinely curious. Obviously, I haven't made any complaints.
Well, not to me, you haven't. That has several connotations and conclusions that could be drawn. First of all, if the level of the complaint would deem what level it would need to be dealt with. So you'll have your frivolous complaints. I haven't had an email replied. I haven't had a response. There is a scale of escalation, which is called the all-port scale, and it was designed to look at low-level harassment and how it escalates to murder. And many years ago, there was a murder in Neath. Yeah, you'll see the relevance in a minute. There was a murder in Neath, a gentleman by the name of Mr. Singh, who owned the newsagents, and there was a low-level antisocial behaviour, knocking the door and running away, ringing the doorbell, running away, causing trouble in the shop. This was predominantly by a group of youths. And because that wasn't nipped in the bud at an early stage, this escalated to causing damage to the external of the building, then paint being daubed, then racist graffiti being painted on the building. And you can see this level of escalation going forward. Until the end, Mr. Singh was actually murdered because there was no intervention in relation to this increasing level of aggravation and antisocial behaviour. So if I transfer that now to the question that you've asked, very often if you can nip in the bud an early complaint which doesn't escalate either through personal issues or different characters that can't get on, which we all know, we're all humans, that happens. If it's low level, you try to resolve it with question J on this report about councillor resolution, but within a political group. But if the level of the complaint is like sexual harassment of that nature, then in the Labour Party, we've got policies that are immediately invoked. The person would be suspended from the Labour group, the whip for the Labour group would be removed, and there would be an internal investigation that would be taken out by our governance unit in London. So anti-Semitic, homophobic, anything that falls within that realm. But you've also, as a leader, got to bear in mind is, are the code of conduct potentially being breached? And Mr. Griffiths will confirm, whenever I get issues in relation to a member holding a position, going to the workplace where they work on official visits, are they breaching the code of conduct of conflict in relation to those things? Someone writing emails to a private company, which could be perceived that they're acting in an official capacity as a councillor with person of influence in relation to decision making further down the line. I will always check with Mr. Griffiths in relation to the efficacy of that complaint. And I'm not asking him to resolve the complaint, it's the actions as opposed to the complaint itself. So what is being complained about, and at what level does that need to be addressed? Is it a formal complaint that Mr. Griffiths deals with as the monitoring officer? Is it something that is for the internal workings of the Labour Party? Or is it something that you would need to self-refer to the Ombudsman? So that's how I deal with those types of complaints. And Mr. Griffiths has been nodding furiously while I've been saying that.
Yes, I can confirm. That's absolutely correct.
Could you just pop your mic on?
I think the issue about thick skin, resilience comes to mind. I think if people in a public office do have to have a certain resilience, because whereas we can control to a certain extent behaviour within the council, and we do have the code, unfortunately society generally is not governed by that same code, except by their own morals and ethics and their values and what can be perceived as the norms of society and good behaviour. So there has to be perhaps that resilience rather than a thick skin, which is, I agree with you, Rob, that's a little bit more derogatory in a way, that actually having a thick skin, well, it doesn't matter what anybody says to you, but you do have to have a certain resilience to be able to undertake your roles and to do it effectively. So again, lots of good points, and that early intervention, again, that's why it's important that people adhere to the code, because that nips things in the bud and it addresses things before they do escalate and get out of hand. So thank you for that, Rob. Next question.
Yeah, training for councillors. It's vitally important. You know, you don't undertake any role in any form in society without a form of training, induction training. And over the last 3 sessions of councils since 2012, the training and induction has been better and better. This year, i.e. last year, when the council was incepted, it went to another new level. There was more engagement. I did have an initial list from Craig that not all my councillors within the Labour group had actually attended the standards training, but then named and shamed and basically sent emails out saying that you do have to attend this training. It wasn't given as an option, even though I suppose it was. And I'm pleased to hear that all councillors now received that training. How can you do a job if you don't know what parameters you're working in? You need those guidance, you need those rules to be able to contain your activities, that either you don't bring yourself into disrepute or you don't bring the council into disrepute. And that then will obviously be a reflection on one or the other. What I would like to see is refresher training. perhaps about halfway through the council, just to remind people that there are these rules and guidelines, because something that you are trained in May, June of last year, you may not remember in 4 years' time. So a refresher, perhaps bring in more stated cases for study on issues since that training was given, that would be relevant to going forward, and perhaps in some of the spheres that we've talked about this morning. I think the more juicier the cases and the more robust that you can provide them, then the more interest it's gained from participation. So that's the only thing. The training is great, and I keep on referring to Craig. Mike, who's the Deputy Monitoring Officer, is also an excellent font of knowledge in relation to, whether there is potentially or not breaches. So it's a good team that legal have built on experience and a friendly atmosphere that you can go to them with these questions. So that would be my comment, is to look at refresher training halfway through council.
Thank you, Rob. That's helpful. And I think the last question. Oh, sorry, Sarah. Sorry.
Sorry, it was just sort of touching onto that again. So, I mean, I assume if there was an update to the code, the legislation, or an update from the Ombudsman, we would do refresher training at that point anyway.
Very much so. If there was a case that anything specifically came out, which I think our members needed to be aware of, we'd put on an all-member seminar. There'd be correspondence and guidance that would be issued for myself. So anytime there is something significant, yeah, we'd put protocols in place to be able to address it.
Yeah, the LRP, Councillor v Councillor, it's not used as it should be. I think perhaps there's a lack of knowledge in relation to it actually existing. It may be mentioned, but again, it'll go out of people's minds. It can be a more effective tool than it currently is. I think we have more complaints, councillor on councillor, and dare I say it, and Mr. Griffiths can confirm this, on town and community councils than actually county councils. So therefore, is it limited in its use because of the lack of general complaints that we get as county councillors, but could be used more as a resolution format for town and community councillors? That would be one point. And as I say, the problem that we have as leaders and as councillors is we are dealing with human beings, and complaints, whether serious or frivolous in nature, will be dependent on the relationship between the complainants, because inevitably when you get a complaint from one individual, you'll get a cross-complaint leveled back if that complaint is pushed forward. So if someone complains, I didn't do something or I did do something, then when that's addressed, they'll say, well, I did do it or I didn't do it, and for this reason, so that person shouldn't have complained. So you get this duplicity of cross complaints. I think there's a lack of understanding in relation to its purpose, and sometimes it's just to get the two people to talk as opposed to resolving the complaint, because some complaints you will never ever resolve because people have that mindset in relation to I am right in this complaint, I've been wronged in this complaint, and therefore no matter what you say or no matter what you do, I'm out for vengeance, I want blood, I want something done about this individual, because, and inevitably it's a personal viewpoint in relation to the complainant that is looking for some form of retribution or justice that goes forward with that complaint. And because we are dealing with human beings, and because we are working in a political environment, it's very difficult sometimes to get across strong political views from your own political party, whatever that is, whether that's independent, whether that's Plaid, whether that's Labour, Conservative, whatever, because your politics and your human nature will drive you towards a certain course of action. Now, disagreeing with that course of action and complaining about that course of action is a very difficult thing to disseminate from the complaint itself. And that's what we tend to forget in relation to complaints that come forward. So would I like to see that used more? Yes. I can't speak about town community councils, but I know for a fact that there tends to be more complaints in that field. And again, Mr. Griffiths can confirm that or not. I have not had the experience of councillor resolution the 11 years that I've been a councillor, but that doesn't mean to say that it hasn't gone on in the Labour Party, because only being the leader for the time that I said, it may have happened prior to that when I was first elected for that first 5 years. But as a member, it's not something that you would normally come across in relation to suggesting that. It's certainly something that I would suggest, but I think the problem that we've got in these types of things, whilst we can use it on member, town and community and county, the biggest problem we have in relation to complaints is that county councillors have no redress when there are these things, going back to the previous question, that are said on social media, that defame you, that call you corrupt, that call you that you have brown envelopes in your back pocket, that make allegations against you personally and are hidden by the keyboard warriors that are out there. And you've got no redress on that. And I think that is another issue, that we come into this role and we think we can have a level of protection. There is no protection for members in public life. There is no protection. There's no legal protection, or very limited. And you get frustrated. And if you know that these statements that are being made on social media then reflect from a political party or a political part of the political machine, you tend to react to them. And then it's that problem that could be used for this informal resolution. So is there a need for it? Yes. How effective it would be? You're dealing with personalities. What outcomes would you get? Someone's looking for a resolution, an outcome for it. Can you provide that under local resolution? Or are you going to end up saying, we'll have to agree to disagree on this matter? You know, I've had a complaint where someone from the members of the public has complained about a councillor because they asked the councillor to move a dog bin, and the councillor didn't, and they made a complaint. You know, well, it could be a variety of reasons. I myself have had dog bins put in my area, and when I've gone round and just checking, the bin has been moved. Why? Because people in that area didn't want the dog bin there, but I wasn't told that the bin was removed because that's where the bin needed to go. It's these low level of stuff that is ideal for councillor resolution. But with your indulgence, Chair, finishing on this final point, I was reading something quite recently, and for those of you who are Greek philosophers, it's about Socrates, and something that could be quite relevant in relation to informal resolution and complaints. And I thought it was quite apt. So hopefully you'll see the point I'm going to make, and I'll finish then, Chair, with any questions. So someone went to Socrates, who had a great reputation for wisdom, and said that they wanted to talk to them about Socrates, his friend. When Socrates said, before you speak to me and tell me what you want to tell me, I'd like to test you at 3 levels. So the person who was going to speak to Socrates, agreed with that. So the first test is truth. And he said, have you checked what you're going to tell me is the truth? Is it true? And the person said, no, I've just heard it. So Socrates said, okay, so we'll continue with the second test. Is kindness, is what you want to tell me about my friend good? And the person said, no, it's on the contrary. It's not good at all. So Socrates then said, so you want to tell me bad things. You're not even sure if they're true. So maybe the last test could, in fact, be useful. And that's utility. What useful information are you going to tell me about my friend? And the person said, nothing really. So Socrates finished the statement by saying, so what you're going to tell me is neither true, nor good, nor useful. So why do you want to tell me? And I think gossip is epitomized in that statement. And I think if we applied that, and since I've read it, I am trying to apply that. And as I said earlier, I'm not perfect, but I think that's a good moral story in relation to how we get ourselves into trouble by spreading gossip, spreading misinformation. Dare I say it, spreading lies for either personal or political ends. And Chair, on that note, I think I'll finish.
Thank you, Rob, and that's an excellent note to finish on. Socrates, we can learn a lot, and it's still so relevant today, isn't it? I like that. Thank you. And any questions? Yes, Duncan.
Question really on the process just described. Would I be right in thinking that's a form of mediation? And if so, is it grounded in restorative justice principles where you're trying to bring the parties together to an amicable outcome?
Absolutely, yes. It's meant to be an informal process which the Ombudsman Office actively encourages as a way of trying to deal with low-level disputes, which can easily put right perhaps by an apology or some sort of action that would allow parties then to move on without any formal complaint ultimately having to be considered. It's effectively a process where I would appoint a mediator, which effectively is normally one of the corporate directors ultimately within the council. They would bring both parties together to see if they can try and find some sort of amicable resolution. If it's the case that they can't, we have the opportunity to bring together a small panel of members of the Standards Committee to see if they can help try and find some sort of solution. It does require both parties to actually willingly to take part in that process. If one obviously refuses, then you can't really pursue it. But it's meant to be just about low-level complaints to see if we can try and resolve things without the need for any formal investigation.
Wayne.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to put a question to Rob. I've been so encouraged as a new member of late to hear in meetings about us working together across the political divide. Personally, I'm not a political person. I stood as an independent candidate. And I'd like your views, Rob, about cross-party ward members getting together to resolve issues that we can better resolve working together than working individually. And in my particular ward, there are 3 parties represented, if you can call independent candidates a party. And sometimes we're very good at giving lip service to working together, but not always making room for it to work out in practice. We've heard about how during COVID years, it's working together that has got the council through many, many difficulties. And I'd like your views, Rob, on people cross-party working together within the ward to resolve ward issues. Thank you.
I would encourage anything that benefits the community, no matter what political sphere the councillors within that ward hold. I think when the problem that you've got, it comes down to personalities, whether people are prepared to work. I've been fortunate or not, whichever the case may be, that I've only worked within Labour wards, and in my earlier election days, I was the only councillor in that ward, so I could only argue with myself in relation to getting things done. But the political map has certainly changed across the county borough, predominantly more in the Neath area, where you now have a mix of independents and Plaid. And it's not always true to say that even the independents that are separate independents working within a multi-councillor ward actually work together. So if you individually have any issues, more than happy to discuss anything that I could help to resolve with a Labour colleague within a ward. I can't guarantee that that will take place because I'm one of these people. I don't make promises. If I can deliver it, I'll do it. And if I can't, I'm not breaking any promises. But I would certainly encourage multi-member working. But this is where you will get the barrier of politics coming into decision making, because we will have one view on implementation of policies and what's best for a community, and you may have others of different political persuasions that have a different view. There are issues currently going on in the new administration that have differed from the previous administration, and therefore it's very difficult to work under that ethos of political drive. But as councillors, why did I become a councillor? I wanted to make a difference within my community. I wanted to do good within my community. I've never said I wanted to pay back to my community because I enjoy the work that I do, helping people. And anyone that is a ward councillor should be trying to achieve that same goal. And I would hope that with Labour Party members, they would work for the benefit of the community. That's why we all got elected. So that's all I can say to you, Wayne, is if you have on a ward level issues, please give me a call. We'll have a coffee, telephone call, Teams meeting. And if I can help in any way, I will do that. And I'll do that right across the county. You know, I've always done that because when I was the leader of council, I probably helped more non-Labour wards than I actually did helping Labour wards. And I could evidence that tenfold because sometimes it only makes one phone call to be able to get something done. So I hope you've got that assurance.
Thank you so much, Rob. I appreciate that response. I'm not one of these councillors that are looking for the gold medal as the best councillor in the ward. So I believe in working together if we can to resolve certain issues. We'll have our differences of opinions, like you say, but if we can work together, we talk about it and we give lip service to it, but it never happens. And yeah, maybe I'll have a coffee with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And I think a point from Rob's earlier comments was about the LRP, and perhaps it's not as well understood. So perhaps that's something to pick up, maybe in the training or in some way to get that message across as to what it's there for and the process and procedures.
Absolutely, Chair. I'll take that forward. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much indeed. I hope everybody's agreed that it's been a really, really useful discussion this morning, both with Alan and yourself, Rob. So thank you very much indeed for being so forthcoming and giving so much positive contribution to the committee, and lots there for us to take forward, Craig. So thank you very much indeed. Thank you for your time. And I appreciate you have to go. So yes, although we'd love to have you stay, you've got other things to do. So thank you again. Thank you. A proposer and a seconder for the recommendation, do we, Craig?
Yeah, if we can just have it noted, obviously, in that sense for it. So just that you've invited the group leaders and we've there. So just someone to propose that element would be grand.
Happy to propose, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed. Well, that was really good debate and discussion. So yes, excellent. Right, moving on. We have the Employee Code of Conduct. Craig.
Well, thank you very much, Chair. So I brought this report today, something slightly different, because obviously we do focus a lot ultimately within the Standards Committee on the ethical responsibilities of elected members and the rules, obviously, that we require them ultimately to comply with. But I thought it would just be helpful to show you as a Standards Committee that actually there are very similar rules that exist for officers ultimately within the council. And there is an automatic obligation that all officers being employed by Neath Talbot Council will comply with our employee code of conduct, which I've included a copy of within your papers. It's meant to be the framework in which we operate, and I think what you will see as you go through it is there is a lot of significant overlap in some ways between the issues, obviously, then that are with elected members as well, and it gives that framework for officers then to be aware of when they're undertaking their work for it. Very much like elected members, it's based on our Nolan Committee standards in public life: selflessness, integrity, objectivity, accountability, openness, and honesty. The guardians for this particular piece of work are the Personnel Committee. That's a committee we've established, obviously, to look at all employee-related aspects within the council. But given the overlap, obviously, with ethical conduct and the regime in which we operate here within the Standards Committee, you've got the opportunity to be able to comment, make suggestions, any considerations, or any issues that you would like the Personnel Committee or our HR officers and myself then to take forward as a way of improving the document. So giving you just a very quick overview of it, number of key matters ultimately considered: the need for confidentiality, perhaps one of the most significant elements in there, political neutrality. We are here to serve all members, irrespective of any political group in which they are a party of. So any advice that we give and any actions are always with the aim of political neutrality involved. An obligation for declaring declarations of interest to make sure that officers are not involved in any matters which they have a potential involvement with outside of the council, for example, if they have alternative employment or any other factors associated there. We have an element in there with regards to relationship with the public and elected members and the way in which we engage with the public. Obviously, we are public servants. We're here to serve them in respect of the work that we provide. So making sure that there are appropriate standards of behaviour in amongst all of those elements. Making sure that there's no allegations of corruption and we are taking issues and work in the best interests of the general public and not for any other particular purposes. Appropriate elements in respect of the use of financial resources to make sure that money is spent in an appropriate manner. Very similar obligations in respect of gifts, hospitality and inducements. Again, we adopt a very similar format to officers as we do with members, where it needs to be declared and certain restrictions ultimately in place. And then obviously the additional factors about any additional employment they're undertaken outside of the Neath Talbot Council, obviously making sure then that it doesn't impact any of the work ultimately that they undertake. Conduct, very important factor, making sure that these general rules are then embedded. And perhaps most importantly, the consequences for non-compliance. So obviously, as members, you'll be aware that if you are found in non-compliance, there are complaints ultimately to the Ombudsman, and there are various sanctions that could be open to you. However, with officers, the one thing significantly at risk is if you're found to be in breach of the code of conduct, it could amount to potentially misconduct or even gross misconduct. And as a result, then your employment could ultimately be impacted as a result of that, in line with obviously all of the employment legislation and processes that we need to comply with. So purpose, again, just to bring this to you, just so we can emphasize that officers are equally bound to codes of conduct and appropriate levels of behaviour. And in some ways, the expectation on officers is sometimes even higher than what we have put on members, because we operate to a different standard in that sense as well. I'm happy to answer any questions the members may have on this policy, but as I said, it's just brought before you today for information purposes. But if you've got specific matters you'd like to suggest for consideration, we can take those into the next iteration. This is a document that is reviewed on a regular basis. It will be reported, obviously, to our personnel committee if there are any changes. And there's always a lot of work undertaken by our internal audit team on the employee code of conduct, because they will monitor compliance in certain elements against it. And we can take that forward then in that sense. So happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Right, so this is not really in relation to the document itself. I found it quite interesting. I wasn't aware of the political neutrality applying to all staff members, so I had a bit of a look into it. And I was curious, first of all, are community and town council staff, like clerks, for example, also supposed to exercise neutrality up to a point? And how does this fit in with things like union membership and strikes and things?
Well, if I take the first question first, absolutely from a clerk's perspective in town and community councils, then there is a degree of neutrality that needs to be expected. They have an officer of the council. They are not a sort of member in that sense or making any decisions in that regard. So they should be operating with a degree of neutrality in the work that they undertake. Obviously, political neutrality is an important element in respect of the council's workforce and the way in which we work, but that doesn't necessarily mean that because you are an officer of the council, you can't be part of a political group, or you can't undertake work, for example, with trade unions or anything like that for it. You are still able to do that. What you just have to be careful of is you're not seen to be favouring any political views or any particular processes or policies in respect of the day-to-day work that you do. But also in amongst that then as well, you have what are called politically restricted posts ultimately within the council. So that is something that is actually set by legislation, which says that certain officers, given the very nature of the work that they're ultimately involved with, have to be politically neutral and therefore can't really partake in any sort of politically related activities, such as being a member of political parties. I'll give you an example. Myself, I'm a statutory officer within the council as the monitoring officer. I'm not allowed to be a member of a political party. There will be another number of officers who are named, for example, who can't also be members of political parties. we got some policies then which state that if you have someone who's been delegated a specific power within the council, so you've got the obligation to take certain decisions or you can act in a certain way, sometimes you will have to be politically restricted as well. So it's to make sure that people have got the comfort of knowing that the key officers who they're making determinations are not doing so with any political favouritism involved.
Just come back in on that if that's okay. So specifically a clerk, would that be a politically neutral? Because if I give an example without naming names or anything, so I've been in a position where I've had a clerk that was a councillor in a different borough, and they obviously campaigned as a member of a party, and I was quite surprised initially. It didn't say anything, but I was surprised because I saw their Facebook account obviously promoting a party, and it's just you don't. I grew up watching No Minister, yeah, Yes Minister and stuff, and I mean you don't expect it, do you? So I didn't know whether it was appropriate or not. It had nothing to do with their role as clerk, just to be super clear.
The role itself in respect of town and community council is very different to the county borough councils, and they've got different rules ultimately they need to comply with. So I don't think there's any automatic bar as it would be for clerks and town council, but obviously they have to act in the best interest of their town and community council. And if you have a politically balanced council or there's a coalition or whatever the case may be, obviously different groups will favour different policies and different protocols. The role of the clerk is supposed to be somewhat neutral in trying to implement those. Now, irrespective, for example, outside of their employment, if they are a county borough town or councillor, then obviously they've got to put appropriate measures in place to be able to make sure there is no conflict of interest as part of it. But I think political neutrality for anyone who's in a process like a county borough council is certainly quite a key element here.
Sarah, Tom?
Yeah, just one observation really, going through the various points, selflessness and everything. I can't see any mention of discrimination. Yeah, I thought perhaps there would be something specific on discrimination.
I think you're absolutely right there, Richard. And obviously we've got the provisions in there that people have to act in accordance with the Equality Act, but there is no specific section obviously highlighted in respect of discrimination there. So again, something we can take forward. Absolutely fine. That's no problem at all. I'll make a note of that and we can present that then in the next iteration of it.
Thank you, Tom. Just one question from me. Do you have many breaches of the employee code?
No, I would say, but you might be the best person to come in here.
Sorry, Anne-Marie.
She's obviously involved sometimes in a little bit more investigation work than I am. But on the whole, I would say, our numbers are very, very low in the big scheme of things.
I would tend to agree with Craig, and where there are breaches which are brought to our attention, it tends to be through ignorance as opposed to people deliberately circumventing the rules. Often when you point it out to members of staff, they go, oh, I didn't know that. It wasn't something, and it is something that has been brought up in the past with HR colleagues and other managers to ensure that officers are made aware of the employee code of conduct as part of their induction. So whilst I would agree with Craig that any breaches tend to be, in my view, of a non-deliberate nature.
Thank you. Yes. Any other, Duncan?
So, Craig, you're happy to take comments on the document that was presented and any thoughts and observations?
Absolutely fine. Indeed. Any thoughts, observations, please feel free to make them. They haven't necessarily got to be in this forum. If you've got something outside of the meeting you wanted to send to me, that's absolutely fine as well. I'm happy to take on board any suggestions that members have.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much for the report, Craig. I thought it was really helpful to have it because it just sees the whole balance between the code of conduct for the members and for the officers as well, and just serves to indicate that everybody within the council does actually operate within certain standards and certain codes, and that they're clearly laid out so people do know what to expect and what the consequences are. So thank you very much, Craig. And the report is just for noting, isn't it? And if there's any comments that anybody would like to make, then please do forward them to Craig. So thank you. The next item is the whistleblowing arrangements.
Thank you very much, then, Chair. Again, something slightly different that we haven't brought to the Standards Committee before. You have within your terms of reference an opportunity to be able to consider any whistleblowing issues, obviously, that are raised throughout the Council. Now, the overarching committee with the responsibility for this policy is our Governance and Audit Committee. They will make sure, obviously, that there are suitable arrangements in place for making sure that whistleblowing can take place and the necessary safeguards associated with that. And they receive reports at their meeting of the specific investigations that have taken place. But what I thought would be helpful to do for the first time is, obviously, given it's within your terms of reference, was just to bring you a copy of our whistleblowing policy. And Anne-Marie, who you just heard from, is our audit manager, who's the officer who leads on the implementation of this policy, along with our chief finance officer and chief internal auditor. And so I thought it would be helpful for Anne-Marie just to give a very quick overview as to what that policy is and any specific questions you may have.
I don't intend to take you through the short report that I presented and the actual policy as it stands. I would just like to highlight some issues to you. The first, and I think the most important, is that all disclosures that we receive are treated in the same way, regardless of how they come into us. And unlike some institutions, we investigate anonymous allegations also. I think it's also testament to how well publicised the policy is and how open the authority is that so many disclosures are received. The disclosures also come from all areas of the authority, from every service within the authority. I think there often is a tendency that it's a policy that is used more by office-based staff. That's not the case in our authority. It really is, it's known across the entire workforce. Allegations we receive, they're not hidden. Full details are reported to the Governance and Audit Committee. Our external auditors, Audit Wales, receive copies of all of the formal reports that are issued as a result of whistleblowing. And our Chief Executive also is copied in to every allegation. So there is, in my view, complete transparency around the disclosures made, the actions taken, and any forward actions, because with some of the allegations, the resolution may take some time to be fully implemented. Another important point I'd like to bring to your attention is that, in my experience, when whistleblowers actually come forward, it's really quite a big deal. It is not something that they do lightly. It's something that they've generally thought about for a long period of time. They've struggled a bit with it and then finally decided, actually, I need to do something about this. And in my experience, the many years I've been doing this, I have not felt that any of the allegations that have come to us have been malicious. And I think, again, that's an important factor. I detailed in my report the number of allegations received over the last 5 years, and I just thought I'd give you a bit of a flavour of the type of allegations that we've had. So we've had disclosures in relation to frauds by service providers, staff theft, safeguarding concerns, inappropriate culture within a service area, conduct issues in relation to senior management, unfair appointments, nepotism, staff carrying out non-council employment when they should be in work within the job they're being paid for, fraudulent overtime claims, misuse of authority vehicles, staff claiming to be in work when actually they're not, and staff working in secondary employment whilst they're on sick leave from their authority role. Obviously, that's a variety, so the resolutions from those will be different. In some cases, it leads to a disciplinary investigation in line with our disciplinary policies and procedures. In other cases, it highlights control failings within the system, and in that case, then I would make recommendations to plug the gaps to ensure that the conduct can't continue going forward. With some of the allegations, they are as a result of the whistleblower's perception. They perceive someone using an authority vehicle at 9 o'clock on a Saturday evening, and they think, well, hang on, you know, why are they using one of our transit vans at 9 o'clock on a Saturday evening? In some cases, the person using that van, you know, had a legitimate business reason. So there is, you know, there's a myriad of reasons as to why concerns come to us. But I am more than content in my role that the policy we have is robust, it is out there, it's widely known, and that the senior management within the authority do not shy away from being questioned by myself or one of the team when we're investigating any of these allegations. There is an openness and a willingness to engage with us to put right what is perceived to have gone wrong, or in fact what has gone wrong. I'm happy to answer any questions anyone might have.
Thank you, Anne-Marie. I think you made two very good points there about the openness in terms of the culture of the authority and people feeling that they are able to raise these issues, and also it being seen to be an improvement as well. So regardless of what comes through, then it is that opportunity to put things right where maybe there are loopholes or something has been missed out of the policy, and you can rectify it. So it's a positive thing as well. And I think it's like lots of things. The more complaints that you have, the more you learn from them, don't you? And I can remember when things like race, hate crime and things like that being reported, people would say about the numbers, and isn't this awful? Whereas in fact, it was a good thing because it highlighted things and it enabled you to discover what the extent of the problem was. And it sounds very much like as though this is the approach that the council takes in the openness and transparency around this particular policy. I've got a couple of questions, but any questions? Yes, Duncan.
Thank you for that. It's really helpful. One question and one observation. Question first. You say in the documents that we've received that the policy is widely available on the intranet site. I'm assuming it's available in large print format and Braille for anyone who's got sight issues?
Yes, it is available. I actually realised that I hadn't framed that correctly in my report. You are right. It is available in various media because not all of our staff have access to the intranet. So it is available, for example, within the Service Response Centre and outlying buildings. I apologise for that. That's my feeling in my reports.
Thank you for that. The observation really relates to the policy itself. It's on page 65 and it's item 13. The heading and the text don't fit well for me. The heading, item 13, is untrue allegations. And the text says, should an allegation be made frivolously, maliciously, or for personal gain, disciplinary action may be taken against the individual concerned. So I'm thinking of a scenario where an employee legitimately believes the case they're making is truthful and they are flagging something of concern, but the text doesn't fit because the heading almost should be a malicious allegation or a frivolous allegation. And an untrue allegation is something that, in making a genuine observation, it's then proven to be not the case, but it wasn't made maliciously in the first case. So I think that the heading possibly needs to change to better fit the text.
Thank you for that. I take your point, and without trying to pass the buck, I'm not actually the policy owner, because of my role within the internal audit to maintain my independence. I'm not a policy owner or a policy writer. I will take that back to colleagues within HR and point that out to them, and look to have it reviewed, as you say, just reframe the heading.
Sarah.
So coming in on that then, so I mean, if that were to be changed to, for example, sort of malicious allegations, perhaps we would need to add something about untrue, because obviously that would be slanderous or libelous, and that might need to be in there too, as a separate entry, perhaps.
And so, Thomas, if I could take that, often when allegations are made and they're untrue, in my experience, it's been because of the whistleblower's perception of what happens. And it's not that they are deliberately bringing forward an untrue allegation. They firmly believe that what they're saying is true. It's just that they don't fully have an appreciation of the service area or the role that the person is undertaking, and it's perception.
I do understand that. I was just like, this is obviously about frivolous, and there could be consequences were someone to do that. But I mean, if somebody were to put an untrue application, there would also be consequences, or maybe we could add like a comma and add in, like, you know, if you knowingly submit something that you know to be untrue, then
that paragraph just needs to be looked at, teased out a bit, these kind of issues that have been raised, to see if there's any ambiguity there, and to make it maybe clearer in light of the comments that have been made. Tom?
Yeah, I think I'm a retired police officer and serving a police member of staff. I think the phrase we use is honestly held belief. So if a complaint is made with honestly held belief, then you won't be subject of any countermeasures.
Sounds like a good phrase.
I think we may nick that one.
I've got a couple of questions. When the issue that a whistleblower has raised, and you said it's reported to various people, I imagine sometimes whistleblowers remain anonymous and some are prepared to identify themselves. So when a report goes about the issue to whoever it goes to, is the whistleblower, are they anonymised in the report regardless of whether they've raised it and named themselves or whether they have remained anonymously?
They will be anonymised within the report, unless it then leads to disciplinary proceedings, at which point they may then be called as a witness. But that is all explained throughout the process. But where possible, the whistleblower's name is kept, and generally I'm the only person who knows the actual named whistleblower.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. And I've written something here, bear with me, I can't read my writing. No, I can't read it, sorry. I should have to leave that one. I'll have to write more clearly. Any other questions or observations? No? Well, thank you very much, Craig. That's again a really helpful report for us to have, and again it sees the extent of the of the regulations and these the processes and procedures that are there to not just raise issues of concern, but also for protection as well. And I think there's a common theme amongst whether it's the code of conduct for members, for councillors, or for this. It is about protecting people, protecting the authority, and also improving as well. So thank you very much. Thank you. And again, the report for noting. We note the report. Thank you. Next item, Craig, the adjudication panel decision.
Thank you very much, Chair. So, Jen, usual custom, just to give members an awareness of what's been going on throughout Wales at the moment in respect of member conduct related matters. The adjudication panel for Wales, they look at the most serious allegations in respect of breach of the code of conduct. They've recently published 3 decisions in respect of the 3 councillors that I named in the report. Just to give you an indication, they decided on that particular occasion to disqualify those 3 councillors for limited periods. I think what was very interesting in respect of those elements is that they were not actually sitting councillors at the time the adjudication panel made the determination, but they still take that view that they will investigate and take matters forward, because obviously there's nothing stopping a former sitting councillor wanting to stand for election again and coming back in. So that's the purpose really of them considering, and then obviously issuing the disqualification then afterwards. Again, it's helpful to show sort of the position as to what's happening on an all Wales level at the moment. So you can see the types of decision. A lot of these factors tend to only come into more active consideration if we had a particular breach that was going to be before us and we were looking at sanctions. We'd be able to use these particular examples as aggravating or mitigating factors, obviously, to determine what sanction then a standards committee would like to impose. But again, before you as members, just for information purposes today, happy to answer any questions you may have. But again, just to give you that quick flavour as to what's going on nationally at the moment.
Observation really is, I found it really useful. Eye-watering in some of the detail, and actually quite surprised by the relatively low level of sanction applied by the Ombudsman's office to some of the behaviour. Really, in an employment setting, those certainly in one case would have led to a dismissal, I expect. And therefore to be allowed to come back and reapply to be a councillor sometime later was a bit eye-watering. But anyway, so just yes, a thanks really for that level of information. Is really helpful to understand the process, and yeah, very insightful. So thank you.
Yes, indeed. Yes, it was very interesting read, I thought. But it's really good, I think, for the panel to get this information, because we can see what is going on elsewhere, and also realise that actually we're fortunate that we're not dealing with those kind of situations as well. So it's good. And so yes. Okay, yeah, so we note the report, and thank you, Craig, for bringing it. Thank you. And I have just interpreted my handwriting, so may I come back and ask you a question? Quite rightly in the policy, it says that if a person is off sick from their primary employment with the council, they can't obviously then continue with their secondary employment. What about volunteering? If they were volunteering and they were off sick, would they be allowed to volunteer?
Very interesting question there, Chair. I don't know off the top of my head. I would have to speak to some HR colleagues to try and find out what the position would be. I think a lot of it is ultimately going to depend on the nature of any illness, obviously, that they are away from the office with, the type of work ultimately that's being undertaken. And I wouldn't have thought there's an automatic bar. It's about looking at individual circumstances is for that. But probably I'd need to consult with HR. I will look into that and I will come back to you with an answer in due course on it.
So coming in on that, I mean, obviously, if you're suffering from a mental health condition, volunteering can actually be helpful to your recovery. So, I mean, I would hope there isn't a blanket ban on it, and that it would be, very much individual and sort of on an ad hoc basis, really.
No, that was exactly going through my mind, that often volunteering, even if somebody is off sick, can be beneficial. So they could be, for example, volunteering at the local park or something where they're outside in the outdoors, and it's beneficial to their recovery. So if it's not in the policy, maybe something needs to be put in there so that that aspect is covered, that each case would be treated on its merits, perhaps, or something to that effect.
I would agree with what Craig said, Chair, and I think that's a discussion we need to have with HR colleagues as to what addition we make to the policy going forward. But it's a very good point, something which obviously no one had thought of before. So thank you.
Duncan.
It probably, Chair, depends on the nature of the illness.
Yes.
So I think where my ACAS hat, I would look at the nature of the illness. So if someone was immobile and unable to do their day job, if they then were taking a voluntary role where their mobility was unimpaired,
Yes.
the suggestion would be that there's a conflict between the nature of the illness and their volunteering. So, but to take the council's comment on mental health as an impaired nature for the job being beneficial to doing some voluntary work, you can see that there's no conflict there. So it would really depend on the nature of the sickness,
Yes.
I think.
Yes, you'd have to go into details because you could imagine lots of scenarios where it would be entirely inappropriate. But you could have, for example, somebody who is immobile, perhaps they've broken their leg or something, but their volunteering role could be like a befriending service where they are talking to somebody on the telephone. That is still volunteering, but they would perhaps, need to be covered to make sure that they would be allowed to do that. So we leave that with you.
Can I just add one other thing? And it came to me reflecting on the whistleblowing piece that we discussed. The National Health Service, following the mid-staffs inquiry, when patients sadly lost their lives because staff failed to blow the whistle, created a role, interestingly not in Wales but in England, called the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian. And in London, there's now the National Guardian's Office. And every NHS trust in England has a Freedom to Speak Up champion who sits at board level. And they may have a number of Freedom to Speak Up guardians within each NHS organisation, depending on the size. And they act as a filter to be that groundswell, if you will, of listening and awareness of inappropriate, in this case, treatment of patients. And it's something I think that lots of public organizations could benefit from. So speaking with your colleagues in HR, looking at the role of the National Guardian's Office and how that system works could be something that the council may wish to think about, or at least lobby other council bodies in Wales for us to think about collectively. It's proven to be a hugely beneficial source for employees to raise concerns about the treatment of patients and the treatment of each other. Not without its problems, but there's some very useful practice from the National Guardian's Office and annual reports as well that can be freely downloaded. So there might be something of value there.
Duncan, thank you. Thank you very much. And our next item is our forward work programme. Craig.
Thank you, Chair. Again, just before members, obviously our next meeting takes place on the 11th of April, and there's a couple of additional reports ultimately that I'll be bringing to you on that occasion, which I've listed in that document. But again, this forward work programme is a living document. So if there are particular matters members would like to see on the agenda, or certain things you'd like to see me bring reports on, or you'd like to have some discussions on as we move forward, please do let me know, whether it's in this meeting or whether it can come in as a separate meeting, either by the chair or via myself, and I can discuss them with the chair going forward. So this is a matter that's open for additions as and when required. So please do add anything or ask me to bring reports for you on whatever matters you'd like us to consider.
Thank you very much, Craig. And if there's, well, I've not received any indication of any urgent items, so the meeting is now concluded. So thank you all very much indeed for your contributions. Thank you, Anne-Marie and Michael, for coming. And I think it's been an excellent meeting this morning. Lots to take away from it and really interesting. So thank you all for your contributions. Thank you.